Hey everybody, my name is Deja and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a guide to Eric LaRocca. I hope you guys kind of like this little setup. I was inspired to do the fireplace by Rose. I will link her down below. She is a newer channel, but I absolutely love her videos and they're super aesthetic. So if you're looking for something aesthetic, go watch Rose. But as I said, today we're doing a guide to Eric LaRocca, who is one of my favorite authors. I have most of their works right here. Eric LaRocca's works, as you can see, are for the most part novellas. They're all pretty short, under 300 pages. So I can't really get into like the synopses and everything about them because I feel like it'll kind of ruin the magic of the books if I do, but I will definitely be going over them. First, I'm going to go into who Eric LaRocca is, how Eric LaRocca came to be, their writing, just anything about their history and their past. Then I'm going to go into a brief synopsis / buzzwords about each and every work. After I talk about the synopses and buzzwords, I'm then going to be going into my own personal ranking, and then after that I'll be talking about where you can start and where I think you could go if you haven't liked previous work or if you have liked previous work from Eric LaRocca. So Eric LaRocca is a really talented author who's known for writing in the dark fantasy / horror genres, and they often write really thought-provoking novellas or short books that often have to do with obsession and trauma and darker aspects of the human psyche and experience, as well as also incorporating LGBTQ+ themes throughout basically all of their works. Eric LaRocca is known for writing like really beautiful prose. They have such a beautiful way of writing and it's so addictive, but it's also pretty easy to read, even though it's a little bit more complicated and beautiful, as I said. But it's also a big contrast between this very beautiful, descriptive, lyrical writing with this really dark aspects that they bring in and these darker themes that are brought into all of their works. Have seen some people say that they don't like Eric LaRocca because they think that their writing is pretentious. So I feel like it's kind of a writing style that you need to read for yourself to see if it's something that you're going to like or not. I personally absolutely adore and love every single second of reading their books and the writing. So if for me it works, for other people it's not going to work. Eric LaRocca is not an author that's going to work for every single person. They write really dark things. They talk about really things that we don't want to talk about, and their writing is really unique, and they also often incorporate more mixed media elements into their works as well. So it's really an author that you have to try out to see, but I absolutely just adore their work so much, and I think it is some of the best horror that I've ever read. While Eric LaRocca I wouldn't consider extreme horror, it was kind of like the first more extreme thing that I read, and that was Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, but I will talk more about this book later. But this book was the first book that I read, and it really set off my love for Eric LaRocca, and it is a little bit more graphic. It's disturbing, and there is a lot of really like body gore and a lot of their work that toes the line between extreme, as I said. So if you're just a normal horror reader and you don't really like extreme horror, you could definitely try out Eric LaRocca, but you may not love it because it does go to more extreme places than just the general horror genre. Eric LaRocca crafts such beautiful narratives and really dives into the intricacies of the human experience as well as human relationships and how relationships really impact our experiences. Eric LaRocca has garnered some critical acclaim as well. It was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award and also has a pretty dedicated following of readers like myself who will literally pick up every single release that they put out. I think Eric LaRocca is either a hate it or love it author, where you either love basically every single thing they've ever written or you hate every single thing they've ever written for the most part. But I will talk about that more in where I think you should start, of places that I think you could go to if you didn't like some of the previous work that you've read from Eric LaRocca. So I would really say that Eric LaRocca has about 9 works. 2 of them I really cannot talk about in this video because they're literally nowhere to be found. That is A Bright Enchanting Suffering, which came out in 2021, and Starving Ghosts in Every Thread, which came out in 2020. I haven't read these. I haven't heard about anybody else reading them, and they're nowhere to be found. I can't find an ebook or anything like that either. Like, I know they're not being printed and published, but I also could not find the ebooks of them, so they're not being published, but hopefully they will come back. Like, one of his other works was republished under a different name. He also has another work called Fang Dandelion, which came out in 2020, and I think this is his first real work. but this one is number 5 in a series, so I'm not going to be talking about that one as much as well. I do think the series is like where you can read it individually, but I have not read Fang Dandelion. I do plan on it because it is on KU, but it is number 5 in the series, so I didn't really think it was necessary to talk about in this video. So coming into 2021 with their big release that they are most known for, that is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. This has since been republished, but I wanted to talk about this one individually because this is what they are most known for. This is almost 40,000 ratings on Goodreads and a 3.01. As I said, I think it's kind of a hate it or love it type author. In this, we follow a woman in the early 2000s who is selling a apple peeler on eBay to try and get some money. It's a family heirloom, and she starts talking to one of the people interested in buying it from her, and it starts to develop into this ballet of sadomasochism, obsession, death, and how desires can really consume us from the inside out. This is really what set Eric LaRocca off and is his most read work, and this is like what most people know Eric LaRocca for, because this one has such graphic descriptions of certain bodily things and some gore in it, but it also has such amazing discussions around the human experience and really exploring that darker side that we don't always talk about. This one also has a lot of themes relating to the queer experience as well, which I think is just phenomenal. This one is mixed media, where everything is told in messages and emails between the two women, and it's just so good. I'm not trying to get into my personal opinions yet, but this one just really dives into the darker depths of human psyche. Next up that was published is You've Lost a Lot of Blood, which was published in 2022. It has about 5,000 ratings on Goodreads and a 3.36, so this one is a little bit more highly rated. In this, we follow a brother and sister that are going to this mansion that is owned by this video game developer, because the sister is actually supposed to help the video game developer develop this game that has garnered a lot of controversy, and that is actually like the main portion of the story, but that's actually a story within a story. So the main overall arching story, it's about this couple that are actually serial killers, and one of them writes these really disturbing stories, and he wrote that story about the brother and sister. And so this one has a lot to do with like video games and everything like that, but it has a lot of other themes. I think that this is one of Eric LaRocca's most subjective works. I think that there's a lot of different themes that you can get out of this story depending on what you're doing, and I had to reread this book actually to really be able to garner some themes from this story. I feel like for some people like myself, on the first read, this may be a story that seems very surface level and is hard to connect all the pieces together. So this one is one that takes a little bit more work and thinking about than per se Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. This one still dives into those darker themes of the human experience and the psyche and how relationships can really feed off each other. This one is also mixed media because it's a book within a book, but also we are listening to these audio transcripts of the writer and his conversations with his significant other, but he's also adding in his own kind of thoughts as an overlay on the audio. Next up in 2022 as well was published We Can Never Leave This Place. This one is the one that I would say is the most like dark fantasy. It definitely still has horror in here. In this, we follow our main character, and she is in this like apocalyptic war-torn world, and after violently losing her father, her mother actually invites over this guest, and he kind of brings with him some really interesting things and impacts her relationship with her mother significantly. He also offers them some protection from the devastation of this world, but with that comes a lot of horror and depravity. This one has a lot to do with grief and familial trauma, so if that's something that you're looking for, I would definitely look into this one. I will say, look up trigger warnings for all of Eric LaRocca's books, but there is one trigger warning that I know is pretty common that is not just like violence or gore. This one specifically has to do with like birth, so if you don't like birth scenes, I would not recommend this one. There's a very graphic birth scene in this, so I would not recommend it, but this one, out of all of them, I mean, all of them kind of feel like fever dreams, but this one is the most fever dreamy of them all. So if you like more of like that fever dreamy type atmosphere, this is the one to go to. And this one has about 2,000 ratings on Goodreads and a 3.62, so we're getting higher rated, but also this one has less reviews. But this one does have less reviews than like Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. Next up, also published in 2022, you can see 2022 was a big year for Eric LaRocca. We have They Were Here Before Us, and this is Eric LaRocca's first actual short story collection. It has 1,500 ratings on Goodreads and a 3.73, and I would describe this as what it says on the back and what it says on Goodreads, but it says there's the only thing more brutal than nature is love. So this has to do with nature and love connecting together, and this one I would say is very weird. It's very, very, very weird. Like, you're reading from the perspective of insects type weird, or a bird type weird. This one really goes into like the shadowy side of love and the dark side of love, and how love can destroy you. Next up, also in 2022, was published Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes. So this is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke plus 2 other stories. This one has 6,000 ratings on Goodreads and a 3.35. So it does have a higher rating than the original Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, but it does have less ratings. As I said, I've already described Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke to you, so I'm going to read about the other 2 stories. So the second story follows a couple who decide to isolate themselves on an island after the death of their teenage son, and a mysterious man knocks on their door during a storm. And then the third story is about a man who confronts his neighbor when he discovers a strange object in his backyard, only to be drawn into an ever more dangerous game. This one, I would say, goes into themes more about grief as well, but also just themes of existence. I feel like that is kind of like what this collection is about, is existing. And I would say the first 2 are a lot about like love. I would say these stories cohesively go together, but not as cohesive as some of his other work. They are a little bit disjointed in their themes, but they all are about existence and how we exist as people in the world in relation to other people, which I would say is what kind of holds this collection together. I will say that this does have one of my least favorite stories from Eric LaRocca. I would say this one and the next one do have like 2 of my least favorite stories from Eric LaRocca, but they also both have some of my favorite stories from Eric LaRocca in them, and I think that getting through those other stories is worth reading the really good ones. Next up, this was originally published in 2021 under a different name. I forget what it is. It's not even on Goodreads anymore, but it was republished this year in 2023, and that is The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. This is about 8 stories, and they all kind of explore themes of grief, obsession, and control, and it also explores a lot about trauma and tragedy. This one has 1,500 ratings on Goodreads and a 4.0. This one is the highest rated from Eric LaRocca. And lastly, we will be talking about Eric LaRocca's first full novel. Even though this story and You've Lost a Lot of Blood are similar in page length, the one that is coming out in 2023 is Everything the Darkness Eats by Eric LaRocca. And this one, I don't know if it's going to be published by the time that this video goes out, but it will be soon published in June if it's not. In this, we follow a town that has a lot of older people going missing, and a grieving widower and a member of law enforcement kind of get tangled up into the traps of this town. I will say heavy trigger warnings on this one for like hate crimes against the LGBTQ plus community. None of the other ones have LGBTQ plus themes, not all of them, but this one actually has some hate crimes that go on within it. And this one has a very intense focus on like bigotry as a whole, while a lot of the other stories don't necessarily. As of the time that I'm filming this, it has 202 ratings and a 3.36. Now we're going to go into my personal ranking. At the bottom, unfortunately, is his newest release, Everything the Darkness Eats. I have a whole reading vlog where I read this, and I ended up giving this one 3 stars, which is the lowest out of everything. Everything else is a 4.5 or a 5 star. So this one, it definitely sticks out from the bunch, but I just thought it was very slow, and it wasn't the same type of writing that I want from Eric LaRocca. And it felt too much like Eric LaRocca was trying to write a novel when in reality, Eric LaRocca works best in a non-traditional format, and I think that the constraints of writing a novel really hindered this book, because it could have been something so special, but because of the page length, I think that this one felt really drawn out, and it wasn't as like graphic and disturbing as I wanted it to be. Besides like the hate crime scene, that one was pretty leaning into like more extreme horror, but besides that, the rest of the story is very slow and boring to me. But I did really enjoy the themes discussed throughout this one about bigotry. I thought that was super well done, and also Eric LaRocca does grief so well that I really enjoyed it. But this one also does go more into like a fantasy area than a lot of his other work, and this one just wasn't my favorite with how that was done, because I didn't enjoy the fantasy element as much as his other more fantasy work. Next up, I have You've Lost a Lot of Blood coming in at, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th place. As I said, this is one that I've actually reread twice, and the purpose of me rereading it is because I actually like felt like I didn't get out of it what I wanted to the first time, and I didn't understand it as fully as I really wanted to, which is not necessarily the book's fault, but it also has this element of video games in it, which is just not my favorite. I haven't really read a ton of books that have video games in it, so I can't really tell you if that's like an element I do or don't like, but I just wasn't like a huge fan of it, and it's not like at fault of the book. I thought it was really well done, the element, but it just wasn't my favorite. And we do follow the storyline with the brother and sister more than we follow the actual like serial killers, but that was the plot line I was more interested in. And that is a common critique I do see about this, is that people really did want more of that plot line, because the majority of this book, I would say like 60 to 70% of this book is following the brother and sister, probably more like 70%, and then the other 30% is following these two serial killers. But I was really fascinated in their relationship, and I wish we just saw more of it. And it also is kind of giving like Exquisite Corpse vibes, that part. And I still ended up raising this one from a 4 to a 4.5, but I think the rest of the work I have from Eric LaRocca is all 5 stars. So these two definitely stick out from the bunch because they were not 5 stars. Next up, I'm going to be putting this one in here, and that is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is one of my favorite all-time stories of all time. It's 10 out of 10. No, like literally like 20 billion, 1,100 out of 10. It's one of my favorite stories. So I did give this one 5 stars, but as I said, the third story is one of my least favorite from Eric LaRocca. I have like 3 that I really am not like the biggest fan of, and that is this one of the ones in the next collection, and then this one are like my 3 least favorites. But I really did enjoy the second story, and as I said, I enjoyed the first one so much, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, that I can't not give this 5 stars. Any collection, it would really have to be like 2 1-star stories for me to have dropped the rating from a 5-star to anything else. But I loved this one because I got to reread one of my favorite stories ever, and I knew what was happening going in. And when I first read Eric LaRocca, Eric LaRocca really didn't have that much work out. I just kind of heard about it a little bit from my friends. I decided to pick it up on Scribd one day, and it really just like blew my mind, because it was not like anything else I've ever read, and it felt like coming home rereading this story. And I also really enjoyed the story about the couple. As I said, I thought that one was super interesting, and it just went to a different direction than I completely thought. Then next up, I have The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. I absolutely love the story collection a lot, but as I said, it has one of my least favorite stories in it. But this one does have some stories that I really love from Eric LaRocca. There are 2 in this one that like really stand out for me, and so I actually did look and rate each story for this one. I haven't done that, but if you are curious, I rated the introduction by Chuck Wendig 10 out of 10. So then I rated the first actual story, You Follow Wherever They Go, 6 out of 10. I rated Bodies Are for Burning 9 out of 10. I rated The Strange Thing We Become 11 out of 10. I rated The Trees Grew Because I Bled There 10 out of 10. I read You're Not Supposed to Be Here 12 out of 10, which is like one of my favorite stories from Eric LaRocca. That and this are like 2 of my favorite stories ever. And then When Flames Burned Emerald as Grass, that one was a 7 out of 10. I'll Be Gone By Then was an 8.5 out of 10, and Please Leave or I'm Going to Hurt You was a 9 out of 10. I think it actually averaged like a 4.5 out of 5, but I just love the overall collection so much. The stories were very different but very cohesive, so I rated it a 5 out of 5. Next up, I have We Can Never Leave This Place. This one absolutely sent me on a spiral where when I read it, I feel like I got from it what I wanted, but there was also so much that I didn't, and it literally sent me down like a Reddit spiral. I was watching interviews. It really sent me down a spiral because this one literally went off the rails. All of these are kind of fever dreamy in some aspect, but this one was the most fever dreamy out of all of them because it does go to like more of like a dark fantasy place. And this birth scene that I talked about was just crazy, and this story is just literally crazy. I don't know if you guys have ever felt like overstimulation of how there's like so much going on here, but it literally feels like quiet around you. I don't know if you've ever felt that, but that's how this felt. Like it literally felt like so much is going on in here, but around you is like quiet, and that's how the story is. That's how you feel, and it made me uncomfortable, of course, but I absolutely loved it. I think Eric LaRocca is an author that's going to make you uncomfortable, and it's whether you're okay with feeling that uncomfortability or not. If you're okay with addressing these really dark themes and topics and issues, because if you're not, and the uncomfortability is going to make you feel really like not great, then I don't know if Eric LaRocca is going to be the author for you. Then my favorite short story collection from Eric LaRocca is They Were Here Before Us. This one, as I said, is very weird. It's also pretty fever dreamy because, as I said, you're literally reading from like the perspective of like birds and insects and everything like that. But I really loved the combination of nature and love in this story. I thought that was done so well. Out of all of Eric LaRocca's short story collections, I would say that this one is the most cohesive because they all have this theme of nature and love, while some of the other collections are kind of just stories, which are still good and they all have to do with the human experience, but this one was really tied together very well and it was very just tight, which I really enjoyed. I just really love the stories in here because I think that nature is so beautiful but so gritty and dark and uncaring. Nature is what it is, and I love that about it, and I think that that was really addressed in this collection. And then lastly, the one that started it all, things have gotten worse since we last spoke. This one, as I said, really was like something like I've never read before at the time that I read it, and I don't know if I read it now if it would still be my favorite. I think I would still love it, but I don't know if it would be my favorite. But because of the time that I read it, I just absolutely adored this story. It really just, as I said, blew my mind. It was like nothing I ever read. I literally was like I sat there for hours just thinking about this story, and I think about this on a daily basis because it would just stuck with me so much. I think that this is one that will stick with you whether you love it or hate it. So now to go into where I think that you should start with Eric LaRocca, I think that honestly a great place to start is to pick up one of his short story collections. I would recommend The Trees Grew Because I Bled There as the first short story collection to read because I think They Were Here Before Us is a little bit too weird for most people. And Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke is one of my favorite stories, but there's a reason why a lot of people don't like it. It is really graphic. I think that this is like, if you are new to horror, or if you don't really read like more extreme horror, or like if you have read it and you don't like it, this one is the way to go because the stories are done so well and they really explore the human psyche. But I would say that this one does stray away from more extreme aspects, and it does have a 4.0. It is his highest rated work, and I think that's why, because it's so appealing to mass audiences compared to his other work. It's not as weird or strange or extreme or gory, but it still talks about these really dark themes, so that I would really recommend starting here unless you want to go in publication order. And then out of his longer works, like these three, this one I know is part of collection as well, but I would really say You've Lost a Lot of Blood is the best to start with for beginners because it's not as gory or extreme, but it kind of gives you a taste of how Eric LaRocca writes in more of like a mixed media format, book within a book. This one is very fun and it has like this video game element, and this one, even though I feel like it's harder to garner the themes from it than something like this, I think that it's still a good one for you to start with if you're looking to start with Eric LaRocca. And let's just say you've read from Eric LaRocca before, you didn't really like the work. Where should I go next? If you are looking for something to try and give Eric LaRocca a second chance, and specifically if you didn't really like his writing, I would really recommend Everything the Darkness Eats. This one is different. I know that it's my least favorite, but this one I feel like if you didn't like past Eric LaRocca work, you may like this one because it is so different from his other work, but it is a little bit slower, so you have to be prepared for that. And as I said, it does have a pretty graphic hate crime scene in it, so if you are not okay with that or not prepared, or you don't really like a little bit of gore in your reading, I would not recommend this one. But this one is very different, and even different prose wise than some of Eric LaRocca's work. So if you think his writing's pretentious, you don't really like his themes, things like that, I think that Everything the Darkness Eats could be a good one. But then also, as I already said, The Trees Grew Because I Bled There I think is the most marketable to a mass audience because it does have these darker themes and topics, but it's not super gory or extreme in any sense. So that's where I think you could start with Eric LaRocca. I think if I was to rank them on where I think you should start, definitely The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, then You've Lost a Lot of Blood, Everything the Darkness Eats, then Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke and Other Misfortunes, then just Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, and then these last two I would not recommend if you're just starting with Eric LaRocca because I feel like they might put you off because they're a little weird and different. So I would definitely recommend probably starting off with this upper half of the stack, and then if you really love his work and his writing, definitely you would still really enjoy these. But if you love these, you would probably love these as well. So as I said, that's where I think you should start for Eric LaRocca. If you made it to the end of this video, put a little tree emoji for The Trees Grew Because I Bled There. Just kidding. We're gonna put the eye emoji down below because if you've read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, you know, but eyes are an iconic Eric LaRocca thing, so we gotta do an eye. And I will see y'all in my next one. Bye, everybody.
I'm writing rhymes in the kitchen, soaking the moments we live in, yeah. You got the nerve to be on me.